It almost seems like the end of the growing season is as busy as the beginning. I'm putting cages around my young trees and shrubs to protect them from critters over the winter. I prefer to use this hardware cloth. The small holes keep out rabbits and field mice, both of which can cause a lot of damage over the winter. Welcome to the Wisconsin Gardener. I'm your host, Shelley Ryan. On this edition of the Wisconsin Gardener, we'll show you how to get your garden ready for another long Wisconsin winter. Some plants like dahlias can't survive in the ground over winter. We'll show you how to dig them up and store them safely until next spring. We'll also share some tips on an easy way to clean up the vegetable garden. By using this technique, you'll even get a head start on planting next spring. But first up, we learn what needs to be done to our perennial gardens. That's next on the Wisconsin Gardener.
Production of the Wisconsin Gardener is made possible in part by Jung Seed and Nursery Company, with garden centers in Randolph, Stevens Point, Madison, and Sun Prairie. Fiskars, a Wisconsin manufacturer of ergonomic cutting tools for the home and garden, distributed worldwide. And the Aarons Foundation, the charitable arm of the Aarons Company, Brillion, Wisconsin, maker of lawn and garden power equipment for consumer and commercial markets worldwide.
Luckily, a perennial garden is relatively easy to put to bed for the winter, but there are some fall tasks that will benefit your garden and help it to survive a Wisconsin winter. We join Dane County Master Gardener Ann Munson. Ann, thanks for letting us invade your garden.
Sure.
What are you up to?
Well, I'm pruning off these asters. In the fall, they tend to be a floppy plant that gets covered up by the snow anyway, so you want to do a little cleanup in the fall, and this is a good one to remove.
And you cut right back down
to
the
the ground.
down
to the soil level, right.
Now, cleaning up and cutting back seems to be almost a personal choice. I'm a lazy gardener. I never cut anything back, and yet I've seen other gardeners who cut everything down. Are there some tips to help us know which plants we really should be getting out of the garden?
Sure. There are some plants like the flax that are disease prone, and they get a disease called powdery mildew. You can see it here on the leaf.
Those white powdery spots, basically.
Right. And this is a plant that you would want to cut right down to the soil line in the fall, get it out of the garden completely.
Will this spread if we don't cut it?
You can have the disease return the following year. It's a disease that depends on weather conditions, but the flax are prone to it.
Okay, so anything that has a disease problem, get it out of here.
Right.
So things that flop, like the asters that are ugly. What about things that spread by seed? I've got blackberry lily, beautiful seed heads, but they're very aggressive. Would you recommend that?
Definitely get those out too.
Okay, what things do you keep then?
I like to keep plants that have an aesthetic appeal in the winter, that hold the snow, like these purple coneflowers. Mm-hmm. And they capture the snow and they remind you of your garden in the middle of winter. Also, the birds like them. They'll come and eat the seeds that remain on the seed head.
So we're providing winter bird food and something interesting to look out the window at.
Right.
Another plant that comes to mind are ornamental grasses. They tend to stand great in the snow. What else would you suggest?
Well, Rudbeckias are nice. Sedums look great.
They have nice color even.
Right. Joe Pyeweed is another one that's got a big seed head that catches the snow.
And then a real tall, stately looking plant.
Right.
So things that will stand up, have color, texture, and maybe even birdseed.
Right.
Okay. Well, let's talk about winter protection too. What about mulch?
Shelley, this is another plant that I like to prune back in the fall. It's marginally hardy here in Wisconsin. It's a chrysanthemum, and it, like Shasta daisy, are shallow-rooted plants that need a little extra winter protection.
So we're pruning them back to put mulch over them rather than just for aesthetic reasons.
Right.
Okay. When do we do that? Is that something we should be doing, before the ground freezes?
Actually, it's best to wait till the ground freezes, and then you put your winter protection, your mulches on.
So we're not mulching to try to keep the plants warm then?
Right. You want to keep the soil cold. You want to keep the soil evenly cold. Sometimes in the winter you get fluctuating temperatures, you get a January thaw, and then the roots might heave as the soil heaves up from the fluctuating temperature. So the mulch will keep the soil evenly protected and cold.
Okay, so we keep that on all winter, and the idea is to kind of keep everything stable right there.
Right.
Are there good and bad choices of mulch that we should consider using?
What I like are the cheap ones, the ones that are available in your own yard, like pine needles. I have pine trees, so I use those for mulch. Nice and airy, holds lots of air in them. Also chopped up leaves. I take a lawnmower and chop them up fine. Those make great mulches.
Readily available.
You can use pine boughs or spruce boughs. Of course, most people don't like to cut their trees, so if you wait till after Christmas, there's lots of trees available.
Oh, sure. Then we can all do it. And then you've got one that I usually buy. It's a marsh.
Right, the marsh that makes a great mulch. It's very airy too.
Okay, it looks like the criteria for a good mulch then is something that won't smash flat and smother.
Right.
So don't use whole leaves, use chopped up.
Chopped up are good.
Okay, and what about application then? You said you cut this back to about 6 inches?
Right, cut it back to 6 inches. That way the stalks will hold the mulch around the plant.
Oh, they're acting like little stakes sticking through there.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and then you just put the mulch around the plant.
All the way over once
about
it's...
3 inches. Right, the flowers will be gone, and you just put the mulch up around the plants.
Okay, and this stays there till approximately when?
Well, about mid-April. It depends on the spring, but once the temperatures have evened out.
Okay, so be patient. Don't take it off too soon.
Right.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Next up, how to dig and store tender bulbs so they'll be ready to plant out next spring. Dahlias come in many sizes, shapes, and colors. They add beauty to almost any garden, but they won't survive a Wisconsin winter. Other tender bulbs include cannas, grown for their beautiful foliage, elephant ear caladium with brilliant bright green large leaves, tuberous begonias, popular in container gardens, and the delicate hues and colors of gladiolas. We're at Olbrich Gardens in Madison, and I'm going to join the Director of Horticulture here, Jeff Epping, to show you how to safely dig and store these tender bulbs so they'll be ready to plant out again next spring. Hi, Jeff. Looks like you're getting this garden ready for winter.
Yeah, we sure are. We had a hard frost last night, as
Yeah.
you can see by the dahlias. They really take it hard. They start to turn black, and probably in a couple of days they'll just turn to mush. So it's nice to get them out of the ground as soon as you can. It's not absolutely necessary.
So if I'm running behind a little bit, how long do I have?
Well, until the ground really freezes. You know, the ground takes much longer to freeze than the air temperature, so...
So we won't be killing the tubers by leaving them in a little longer.
That's right.
Behind.
That's right. We still have some time, at least until the first snowstorm.
We hope.
Yes, yes. But you know, you don't want something like that around the garden when you got asters and mums in bloom, which really look nice. So.
Prettier stuff, sure.
You bet. You bet.
Well, why don't you talk me through what you're doing then?
Okay, well, we dig around the plant and we use a spading fork rather than a shovel because you have less chance of, you know, mauling the roots in the process.
Slicing them in half.
Right, right. So less damage that way. So we'll just pry around it. And as you can see, they're pretty, they're not really deeply rooted, so they come out pretty easily. And then once we pull them out very gently, and of course the stems are very brittle and break, but we just try to knock off the worst of the soil.
Now you've got a lot still stuck there.
Yeah, and I'm not going to force it all out at this point because I'll do more damage than good. When the soil dries, we can just sort of brush it away. It'll crumble away.
So we could really hurt them. We should be real gentle at this stage.
Yeah, I think it's better to leave it on at this point. We can always
Okay.
wash them off with a hose or something later.
Okay.
So when we get to this point, we can cut any stems that are left. You can see we broke off a couple here.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll just leave a little stub on there, and we can always cut that off indoors when we go to prepare them for overwintering.
And that's the next step, is get them ready for storage.
That's right.
Okay.
Great. Okay, Shelley. This is another tender annual that we want to dig out in the fall, and this is canna. And I think lots of people know what these are, very common.
Well, very striking with nice tall statement, I guess.
It definitely is a nice bold foliage in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what canna looks like when we dig it. So
Enormous.
yeah, very big, and oftentimes you'll have several of these, and that's why people kind of spread them around the neighborhood. But the nice thing is white, no brown, soft black spots on the bulb.
So it's healthy.
Right.
Okay.
That's what we're looking for. That's ideal.
That's perfect for storage then.
On the other hand, we have this elephant-eared caladium.
Beautiful leaves. I love playing with them in the yard.
It really is a beauty. But this one isn't long for this world,
No.
and we have some rot going on here. Okay, so if we're up to me, I just pitch this one. I don't think it's worth saving.
Okay, what if it's the only one you've got?
Okay.
It's from your grandmother.
Oh, then you definitely want to save it. So what we do is cut off the affected portions with the pruners or sharp knife, and you want to sterilize them before you make the cut and after, and we just use Lysol. That's something that works real well.
So you're not spreading it to anything else, basically.
Exactly, and that's important. Then after you do that, you want to dust the affected portion with a fungicide, such as Captan.
Of the root you're talking then?
Exactly, of the root.
Okay.
And we can do that, with less, or just sort of wounds that we've created.
Okay, so disease and like where we've hacked off something when we were digging it up?
Right. When I dug with our spade or fork, I did knock a few off, and that's not uncommon. They're very brittle. So again, just cover those with a little bit of fungicide. Just be careful, it is a pesticide, so follow
Read the instructions.
Exactly. Now with all these too, after we dig them and maybe apply the fungicide, let them cure for 2 or 3 days.
So we're letting them kind of harden off, toughen up a bit?
Exactly. So just keep them dry and not freezing and not extremely high temperatures. Just enough to dry off all the portions of the root.
Okay, and then I suppose the extra soil comes off a lot easier too then.
That's true. You can brush all that off.
Okay, and then what do we store them in?
Okay, so once we have our nice healthy root, here's our canna, and here at Olbrich we like to use just Ziploc or polyethylene bags, could be a garbage bag if you have more, and dried peat moss. And this is, like I said, dry. No moisture in here. We didn't add anything because we want to just preserve the moisture that's in the bulb. Okay. Okay. So we just plunge it in there and just cover it on all sides. Kind of bury it. Yep. Okay. That's all there is to it. But you can also use perlite, vermiculite, wood shavings work equally as well. See, I have these handy. I live near a cabinet maker, and they work just fine for my large canna roots. You bet. It's cheap too. Okay, are there things we shouldn't use? I wouldn't use, don't put them in soil, don't put them in compost. A lot of times if the compost pile hasn't really got hot enough, there'll be fungal spores that can infect. And we don't need any more disease brought into it. Exactly. Let's talk about temperature then and actual where we store these containers then. Sure. We're talking about 45 to 60 degrees, something like that. It's as long as it isn't freezing and it's not too hot. Here at Olbrich we store them in the basement of an old pump house. We don't supplemental heat it. It just so they're pretty cool. Good temperature. Right. I'm at the opposite end. My basement's 60 year round, and they seem to survive every winter. I've stored them in there. Good. What about light? We'd want to exclude light if we can. Sometimes if they get just a light bulb on even will cause them to start growing again, especially when you get closer to spring. So cool and dark. Exactly. Okay. Anything else we should know about? Not a bad idea to label either the bag, the box, or throw a label in. So or both. Right. So when you pull them out the next spring, you know what they are. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Okay. So if you do this right, you'll be ready to plant these out next spring. But remember to wait until all danger of frost is past. It seems like in the fall I spend an awful lot of time cleaning up the vegetable garden. We're in Milwaukee County with Sharon Morrissey, UW Extension Home Horticulture Agent. And Sharon, I spend an awful lot of time in the vegetable garden. I understand you have some tips that may save me a little extra effort?
Yep, composting right in place. Called sheet composting, laying down a layer of organic matter right in the garden, and then doing the fall soil preparation so that in the spring you can get into your garden earlier without doing a lot of digging. So you mean I don't have to drag it all out to the compost bin and then drag it back next spring? That's right, and that's essentially what you do with composting. Sure. And why take that stuff out of the garden if it can break down right in the garden? Okay. So something like these pepper plants here, I would just chop those up into small pieces and lay them out over the surface. All this mulch can get worked into. And just dig it right in then. That's right. What about I've always been told that one of the reasons you clean up everything is for sanitation and disease issues and the whole concept of the crop rotation. That's right, and it's still a very good idea to rotate crops, and you should remove any diseased plants too. A good rule of thumb is that if anything has died prematurely, take it out. It may be a problem. Okay. There are some things that are definitely a problem, like on this tomato, and tomato diseases we're all pretty familiar with, I think. Well, there's a lot of them too. Yeah, Septoria leaf spot's probably the most common one. You can see the spotting on these leaves. This plant doesn't have a whole lot of that, but I'd try and remove as much of that damaged plant material as I can. The good green stuff on top that hasn't been affected by the disease, you can just chop up and leave in place.
Would I put the damaged stuff into my compost bin instead then?
No, it's a good idea to get that off the property if you can, or bury it someplace else on your property where you're not going to be gardening.
If it looks sick, keep it away.
Yeah, except something like this.
Sick.
Yeah, this is a good sick one. This is powdery mildew. On the cucurbits and the squash plants, we had a lot of powdery mildew this year, and we pretty typically do. But powdery mildew is an organism that doesn't last a long time in the soil, and it's not very long-lived, and so it probably won't cause too much trouble next year.
So again, we chop it up and till it into the soil.
That's right.
What about, well, I think of vines. In fact, stuff like this sometimes is real hard to break down, even in my compost bin.
That's right.
Other things like that?
Well, in that case, you can either chop it up and leave it in place and then rake it out in the spring, or you can just take it out right now in the fall and chop it up, put it in your compost pile. I think a lot of us work the compost pile and kind of throw back the things that take a little longer to decompose. Corn stalks are a good example of that too. They really break down very slowly, so it might be better to just take it out this fall.
And of course, we can speed up anything that breaks down by chopping.
Yep, it's one of those concepts of composting.
The smaller the chopping, the quicker it's going to break.
That's right. And with sheet composting, if you could chop things up into small pieces, you can use any kind of tool to do that. Loppers, hand pruners, some people use machetes, cutting it up into as small pieces as you have time to chop it up into. And again, the smaller, the faster.
So if I'm in a hurry, 2-foot chunks.
Right, leaving it whole. No.
Just chop it up then.
Right, and then as you work that into the soil, you're kind of providing those conditions that you find in a compost pile. It comes in contact with soil microorganisms, there's moisture, and there's air. And that's what composting is.
Okay.
Shelley, here's a few things that you may want to take out as you're preparing the soil this way. This year's vegetables that you didn't harvest are not going to make it this year anyway. If you work those in, you may have some volunteer plants next year from them.
So might have some surprises, but not a real crisis,
No.
unless you want a clean garden.
That's right.
Well, speaking of a clean garden, though, what about things like the weeds and the weed seeds?
Well, some weed seeds will germinate if you leave them in the garden.
Uh-oh.
But remember that you're going to be working those under, and most weed seeds do need light to germinate. And since they're going to be buried, they won't have the light, and you're not going to be working it up much in the spring. So as long as you don't disturb it a lot in the spring, those weed seeds won't germinate again next spring.
So
some might, but...
Again, for preventative, get out the ones you can, but don't panic.
Right.
Okay.
Not a great big deal.
Now, you've got some of your organic chopped up material here.
Right.
What's the next step?
Started with a layer of that chopped up matter, organic matter from this year's garden, and there's not a whole lot of it there, and you can put up to a couple of inches of organic matter on there.
Okay.
So I will add some stuff that we've got. We can add any kind of organic matter, a couple inches deep, and then just start working it under.
Now, are you going to go back and dig this up finer? You're leaving really big chunks of dirt, I see.
Nope, and you don't really need to because the winter is going to do the work for you.
How so?
Well, the water that's in that soil is going to freeze and thaw over the winter, and as it does, it'll break those clods down, and then in the spring, they'll really be broken down pretty well.
So that's really one of the advantages is the winter's doing the digging, the fine digging, instead of us.
That's right. We get it done this fall, not much to do next spring, and we can get into our gardens earlier next spring too, because the soil's going to warm faster since has more air in it, and it's also going to dry out faster. So those early spring season crops that are hard to get in because the soil's too wet, we might have a chance if you do your fall preparation.
Well, you know, that's always been a frustration. A lot of those really early crops, leeks comes to mind, some of the lettuces, they say plant in the garden as soon as the soil can be worked. Well, in Wisconsin, sometimes that's June.
Right.
It's too wet.
You'll miss those crops altogether some years because it's too wet.
Exactly. It's too hot by that time.
Right.
So what are we doing in the spring then?
Then in the spring, all you need to do is get your rake out the big pieces that haven't decomposed over the winter.
Big chunks of corn
stalks, vines, and things that may not have decomposed. Cut your furrow and plant your seeds.
Oh, wonderful. How easy. Thanks, Sharon. So if you get a head start this fall, you're going to get a head start next spring, too. When getting your yard and garden ready for the winter, don't forget your fruit crops. We join UW Extension fruit crop specialist Terrell Roper to learn what we need to do to our fruit trees and berries. Terrell, when I think of getting my yard and garden ready to get to bed, I don't think of painting my apple tree. Why are you doing this?
We're painting this tree trunk white to prevent southwest injury or sun scald. The way that occurs is in the winter when there's snow on the ground, and there's sure to be snow on the ground here later, and we get a sunny day, then light reflects off of the snow and up onto the tree trunk. If the tree trunk is dark, it absorbs the light energy and warms up, and the tree then forgets that it's winter. And then after those sunny days, we always get a cold, clear night, and if that tree isn't hardy, it forgets that it's winter, it'll be injured. And that's the sun scald or southwest injury. And it most commonly occurs on the south and the west side of the tree where the light energy is greatest.
Okay, what does it look like so that I can know?
In the spring, typically we'll get a long wound where the bark will peel off, it's loose, and it'll flake away. And then later there's a long wound, and it'll heal up, but it's best to prevent it.
We don't need to stress them more than we have to.
That's right. And we're using a white interior grade latex paint because it breathes. And I've diluted this with 2 parts water to 1 part paint. We don't want to use any sort of an exterior paint, and certainly no oil-based products, because they don't breathe well. And the tree trunk is alive and needs to exchange oxygen and air throughout the winter as well.
So it's really just a white reflective surface. We're not trying to coat it or smother it or anything like that.
That's right, just a light coat.
Okay. Do I have to paint? Are there other options?
There are some other options. We can take a look at those.
Okay.
Shelley, here's the other material that we can use to prevent sun scald. It's this craft paper, and we simply spiral it around the trunk, starting at the bottom and working to the top.
Okay.
But before we can do that, we've got to get rid of this vegetation around the tree. This grass in particular is competitive with the trees, and it'll take the water and nutrients away from the tree.
Okay.
So we can pull it or mow it or spray it with an herbicide, and then the best approach to keep it from coming back is to use a mulch around the tree, a foot or two out away from the tree.
Now, if I mow it, don't I have to be careful about getting awful close to the tree?
That's right. That's the other problem. If we have vegetation growing right next to the tree, is people want to get close with their string trimmers or lawn mowers, and they'll bang up the trunk and damage the trunk again.
So that's why the mulch is out so far, to protect the tree again.
That's right.
This also looks like a great hiding place for field mice, other critters.
Right, and rodents can be a real problem with fruit trees in the winter when food is scarce. They'll gnaw this bark off and kill the tree, and the grass offers great protection. And we also have food supply for them. That's got to go.
Okay, so keep it all clean, and that'll help with all of the problems we're talking about.
That's right.
What about some of the other fruit crops? What about raspberries?
Let's go take a look at them.
Okay.
One of the most important things you can know about raspberries, Shelley, is what kind you have. If they're fall-bearing or summer-bearing. And these are obviously fall-bearing raspberries because it's fall and there are berries
Narrows
on
it
the
down.
canes.
And that makes a difference in how we treat them then.
That's right. For the fall-bearing raspberries, the easiest way is to just mow them all off. Cut them off right at the ground level, and that can be done anytime when the leaves are not on the cane, so late this fall or early next spring.
Okay.
And then next year, new canes will grow up and we'll get a crop in the fall again.
So that's the easiest way to deal with them.
Very easy.
Okay, what about the summer bearing? I understand there are a little bit, a few more steps involved.
The summer-bearing raspberries are a little more complex because the canes grow one year and then fruit the second year.
Okay.
So we don't want to cut out the canes that will produce next year's crop, but once they've borne a crop, they've done their job and they die and it's time to get them out. So we want to cut them off very close to the ground and get them right out of the planting.
And is this what it's going to look like after it's done? I mean, we won't have any confusion when we go out there to cut these back.
No confusion.
Okay.
Very dead.
Okay.
And this could have even been done earlier in the year.
Okay. Is there anything else we do at the end of the growing season?
There's nothing else we need to do right at the end of the growing season, but sometime between now and next spring there are a couple of other things that need to be done.
Okay.
One is to remove about 25% of the length of the cane on the tip, so we'd probably cut it about right here. There aren't much fruit produced up here, and cutting it there will tend to stiffen the cane below and improve the crop. And then again in the spring we want to thin out the number of canes to about 6 to 8 canes per running foot of row. If we have more canes than that, the canopy's dense, don't get good air movement through it, and it's difficult to pick them as well.
A little too crowded in there.
Right.
Do we have to mulch raspberries for winter?
Don't have to mulch raspberries. They're very hardy and they survive the winter just fine. But we do have to mulch strawberries. Strawberries are a little more tender, and we want to cover them over with 2 to 3 inches of a light, lofty material that will provide some insulation and keep the temperature from fluctuating. So straw or marsh, either one works very well.
And can I do that now?
I would wait a little while. You want a little frost in the soil. Usually in southern Wisconsin, about Thanksgiving is the right time. And in northern Wisconsin, maybe a week earlier.
All right. It sounds like I've got my work cut out for me.
You do.
Thanks for your help, Darrell.
Sure.
Don't forget watering when putting the garden to bed. Many plants, particularly evergreens, which don't go completely dormant over the winter, will benefit from one last deep watering before the ground freezes. Plenty of water helps them suffer less from drying winter winds and the harsh winter sun, both of which cause desiccation. So get out there one last time with your watering can. I'm Shelley Ryan. Thanks for joining me on the Wisconsin Gardener.
Production of the Wisconsin Gardener was made possible in part by Jung's Seed and Nursery Company, with garden centers in Randolph, Stevens Point, Madison, and Sun Prairie. Fiskars, a Wisconsin manufacturer of ergonomic cutting tools for the home and garden, distributed worldwide. And the Ahrens Foundation, the charitable arm of the Ahrens Company, Brillion, Wisconsin, maker of lawn and garden power equipment for consumer and commercial markets worldwide.